So it just
our
goes to
oldest,
show you guys.
yeah,
I'm thinking in a very literary sort of direction.
you're being literary.
The two of you are going a different way.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's homegrown Christianity. Well, next time, that's what it will do. After theology beer camp, we'll just do homegrown camping or something like that. I feel like you'd have to go camping. And all of a sudden, at the end of the podcast, everyone just lays down and stares at the stars. And that's the best time to pull out the guitar and start singing all the 60s protest songs.
I was just thinking Rocky Mountain High,
Well, that's possible as well.
Right.
All right. Well, yeah. So that wasn't that crazy though? I'm like, it explains tons of other things about the people that were here before, but that you've been in a place for 3 years and there's this secret layer you didn't know about.
It's just scary to me.
Yeah. And there's no easy way of getting into it. So you're putting a ladder almost straight up in a closet to get there, but it was built like, it's for regular use. So
you do know you're talking to basically two frustrated novelists, and you're giving us all kinds of ideas here, Tripp.
We'll see.
This is really going first. All kinds of directions in my mind. So anyway,
yeah,
we should probably get going, shouldn't we?
All righty.
Hey, I should tell everybody I'm alive. I thought I was going to the hospital yesterday, but I called my doctor and he said, no, you're not quite that sick yet. So just see what happens tomorrow morning. I woke up this morning and I felt probably 70% better. So if you hear me cough, I'll try to turn the thing off if I have to get too close, if it seems like it's going to be too bad. But I seem to have made some improvement today. Good improvement today.
I'm very glad. When I went to ESAT, which is this European society, everyone got COVID basically that went. Yeah. It was like the first time I'd left, and it was the same time we were grading. I couldn't think for like a week. I was trying to read people's papers to grade them, and I'm like, what is happening? If you thought papers on the ontological argument were bad when your brain was at peak performance, just wait till you get to the 7th one with COVID brain, and you're like, what is going on?
Every house on my street had at least one case this past month.
Yeah.
It's just like it's on fire. So.
All right, let's see. There we go. Like that. Hello, everyone. This is Tripp. And guess what time it is? What time is it, Diana?
It's ruining dinner time.
Oh, yeah. We're here with Diana Butler Bass and Brian McLaren. We're about to ruin your dinner. Brian, Diana and I like to ruin people's dinner by talking about religion and politics. And you've done that before. But see, here's the thing, is you're notoriously kind and nice. So if you say something too nice, then we might repeat something back just to level up the angst, because part of the game is we're going to ruin dinner. Okay. And do you have that in you? Like, how many dinners have you ruined in your entire life?
Oh, what a good question.
Intentionally, quite a few. Unintentionally, I don't know.
Well, I'm super excited that you're joining us. Thank you, everyone, for being here. People are part of the cottage, the homebrewed community, and such. This Ruining Dinner gathering is sponsored by our friends at the Wild Goose Festival. So if you don't know about the Wild Goose Festival, then you should. But if you do know, then you probably are already thinking about, should I go camping with all my favorite friends or stay nearby in a hotel, if that's how you roll. But if you do, they sent us a discount code for everyone that's on here hanging out. It's Homebrewed 2022. You type Homebrewed 2022 in, you get a discount, and you can hang out with, Diana and Brian are going to be there. It's going to be in North Carolina. It's going to be right next to, it's like 45 minutes from my new home. So I'm pretty excited about it. But Homebrew 2022. And someone in the chat put the link to it. That way people don't know. But how would you describe Wild Goose? How would y'all describe it?
Oh gosh. I hate camping, and I hate being outside, and I don't like bugs, and I can't stand humidity. So every year I can't wait to go to North Carolina and hang out outside with bugs and humidity and with all my friends camping. And it's all because it becomes sort of the best, most joyous gathering of my Christian friends that happens all year. I mean, I just think it's amazing. It's fun. It's smart. The conversations are remarkable. It's just an experience, and all the stuff that I hate, it just goes away, because the people are so remarkable.
Yeah, I think that's about as good a testimonial as anyone could give. For Diana to enjoy being outdoors with bugs and humidity is an awful lot. People have compared it. I've heard people describe it as Burning Man and Woodstock with slightly less nudity, but I'm not sure if that's fair. But it really is a fantastic time. Yeah, it's amazing people. Just a great vibe, art, justice, music, spirit. It's just great.
Oh yeah. And if you're new to it, there's also really cool children's and youth programs during it. I did the music with the kids for like 7 years in a row, and it's always fun. I mean, I love hand motions, and I like when I'm singing and other people sing along with me. And I found out that at Wild Goose, all the kids want to sing and do hand motions. So if you're a parent, don't think that you're just policing your kids the entire time. You actually have they're volunteers. They're super excited to.
That's really true. Let me just say, for parents with small kids, they have a great program for kids. But I have a memory, and this might not sound good, but it really is a beautiful memory. Some years ago, we had a whole lot of rain, and the little dirt road that was going through the camp had big potholes that were filled with muddy water. And I see these two kids splashing in the water, just covered in brown mud. And beside them, I see their mother with her arms folded, just sort of watching. And I walked up to her. I said, "You're a really good mom." And she said, "Thanks for telling me. I was just trying to decide I'm really good or I'm really terrible." But the kids were just in heaven, splashing in that puddle.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as sort of the very best things about a Bible camp that you remember that you actually liked without any of the bad theology.
That's right.
and including beer, a pop-up bookstore by Barnes and Noble, and really great food trucks. And so, like, how can you lose? But do bring bug spray.
Yeah, bug spray is a good idea. Yeah. So people, if you're interested in going, check it out. Use the code Homebrew 2022, and then you can come get hot and humid and geesey. I guess that's not really an adjective, but it could be. It could be. You'll find out if it is one in North Carolina this summer. So now we're going to be ruining dinner by talking about a number of different topics. Brian, we're going to let you pick which one we want to talk about first. Do you want to talk about a whole host of dying institutions? We have a set of religious ones having convulsions of late. We have our democracy having one. And then we also have the gun violence and the way it's connected to just our militarized nation in general. And then how do we think about the occasional times issues like that jump through and how it's connected to larger systemic webs of violence?
So you're saying that Brian can pick between guns, denominational shenanigans, or insurrection?
Yeah.
I'll take insurrection with the side order of guns, please.
Oh dear. Apparently, if you were listening to the stuff today, you would take it for $250 million, which is how much Trump made off of the whole election lie thing. So anyway, sorry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to monetize it. That's he put his name on all sorts of things to make some money. So now, Diana, you and I have a message about it and things like, I would love for you to set the stage as to, and you hang out in DC all the time. Brian escaped DC to Florida. So he hangs out with alligators and you hang out with politicians. We don't know
crocodiles
who bites more. But when you think of the context of the January 6th investigation, the community processing and such that's going on in the context of religious nationalism and the threats and the challenges we have as a nation, like what are the elements you raise to go like these are the threads we should be paying attention to if we want to have a better idea of what's going on?
With a Trump piece, I think that one of the things I'm really interested in is to see how they're going to tie all these pieces together. I mean, it's clear in the two things that the congressional hearings have done already is that they've laid out a very good case that Trump lied. I mean, there's no doubt about it that he apparently knew completely from the very beginning, from the very first night after the votes started coming in, that he'd lost the election. But the reason why becomes the part of the issue, and what did he do with that lie? And so today they started laying out some possibilities for that. One, obviously, that they pointed to towards the end of the hearing was that he monetized it. And also that he was, he's trying to hold on to power, no matter what it costs the system of democracy. So I think that putting those things together and making the case that he not only knew, that he not only lied, but he had these purposes in mind, and that he then manipulated the system in a corrupt way to both enrich himself and to, hurt the democratic process, the democratic transition of power, is what they're going to have to prove. So they've got a lot of evidence out there, and they've got a lot of good evidence out there, but they have to really knit it together and make it, sort of just iron. They have to really weave that fabric together. So I don't know. What do you see, Brian? You know lots of people up here in DC from all the years you lived here.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the thing that strikes me about this. So we're really going to ruin dinner with this one. But what really struck me today was how this whole insurrection was really built on the Civil War and on white supremacy and on scared white people who want to continue to vilify Black people. I mean, this felt to me like we had lost however many 140 years, and we were back in Reconstruction with white people trying to say, look at those terrible voters in Detroit. Look at those terrible voters in Philadelphia. Why Detroit and Philadelphia? Well, obviously, it's because this plays into old racial tropes. And what's so horrible about this is the guy who was lying and scamming and cheating and rigging and falsifying an election was a white, powerful, rich white guy. And he has the absolute shameless cravenness to try to make it sound like it was people of color. I mean, isn't this the worst of American history played out before our very eyes? So that to me is just so disgusting. And frankly, this is where all the gun stuff fits in too, because I think that all of this NRA stuff is really just about arming white people. And so a school shooting happens and they want to arm some more white people. And they want to teach children to be really comfortable. And especially we know they're thinking about white children to be comfortable around guns, to grow up their whole lives with semi-automatic weapons. And it's just, to me, a dystopian, racist, and maybe unconsciously racist, but no less really racist set of tropes. So to me, I just feel like all of American history is being recapitulated. And maybe I'll say one positive thing, though, and that is that the decency of the committee, the January 6th investigative committee, they've just seemed very decent. And we see, at least for 2 hours, modeled Republicans and Democrats working together the way that we might wish that they could work, to show that it's possible. And even the 10 Republicans that have said that they would sign on to some very rudimentary gun control legislation, the fact that I don't think any of the 10 of them are running for re-election also tells you just how sick the system is, but at least there's some decency among people who are about to leave office.
I think that Mitt Romney is going to run again, but he's so, independently wealthy, it doesn't really matter for him. And there's no way that Utah is going to turn on him.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I've been surprised too by, there will be people here who might scream at me, but I can admire that Liz Cheney is making a stand here for how she understands the Constitution and the rule of law, and how she has deployed that in her political life is something I can certainly disagree with on specific kinds of issues. But to see her it's really a courageous thing to be able to just be a woman and sit there and say, I'm just going to punch all you guys in the face with the truth. And, if you can't take it, I'm sorry, but this is what I want to go down in history for. It's putting these words on record about the Constitution, about this election, about the democracy. And, Joe Biden won, period. And there are so few Republicans who are willing to say that in Washington, D.C. She's just flying in the face of all of them. And that, that earns my respect, whatever other disagreements I might have with her. And I still find it just a little shocking that, her father was once probably one of the most powerful men in the world, and that the whole Republican Party has decided to line up with a guy who basically used to have the CIA in his back pocket. I mean, I don't even begin to understand that part of it, but she's making a play for history here, and I think it's the right play.
Well, the thing that strikes me in the present about what both of you said is this way in which this moment's revelatory of the kind of fear at the heart of white America. And it really connects, I think, to both of you reflections. And I know Brian shared his sermon in your newsletter, Diana, of thinking about, 100 years after shall the fundamentalists win. Like underneath that is this sense that America is under threat if this particular part of the country doesn't see itself always mirrored in the halls of power and of culture. And I think that it's for those that aren't a part of it, it's shocking, right? That this kind of fundamentalist Christian nationalism thing is still like a viable option in the present. But for those who experience America and our culture as a threat to their identity, then it becomes an extremely attractive refuge. And I think for those of us that are deeply Christian and so not that, it makes this whole experience like doubly painful, right? And at least mine's been in Scotland. Like, so simultaneously they're like here, which isn't one of the most, it's like one of the least religious places in Europe, in Scotland. And they're like, so you're Christian and American? And and they're like, go ahead, you can apologize for both, right? And but underneath it, I do think there's this intense fear about whether this community can imagine a world where it's not in charge. And if it can't imagine it, then what do? Will you turn to a vision of God that says, yeah, you should be at the center, and you should be in power. And anything that gets in the way of that is getting away with God's desire for the world, and that's just
and has to be eliminated.
Yeah, all sorts of things get justified once you and God have the same enemies, and your God's unrelated to Jesus, so you have to pray for them. Then all sorts of things follow.
Well said. Well said. Something I felt as I was listening to the hearings today was how fundamentalism really set our country up for this, because having grown up fundamentalist, I know this. When you are a fundamentalist, you're uncomfortable with the truth. You're uncomfortable with facts. The truth means for you what the Bible says. And if Darwin says something different, then you throw out Darwin. And if Freud says something different, you throw out Freud. And so you, in a sense, you live in a make-believe world that grows far more and more distant from the real world every time a new scientific discovery is made. And every time your experience broadens, you have to, in a sense, divorce yourself from your loyalty to the truth and to reality. And so now it's almost like fundamentalism delivered up to Donald Trump, a group of people who prefer make-believe to reality. And they prefer trusting someone who is confident and bombastic to ever having to have a critical thought themselves. And I just think this is really one of the fruits of one of the long-term fruits of fundamentalism. You prepare people for this kind of authoritarian chicanery, and you make people victims of. And in fact, $250 million given to Donald Trump for a big lie and a fake attempt to do something about it is not that different from a lot of money given to prosperity gospel preachers and all the rest. It's the same kind of scam.
Yeah. Sort of reminds you of like people giving all the money to Oral Roberts to build that great big tower, or give it to Donald Trump to build a wall. I mean, it's like, I wouldn't have thought of that on my own, but as soon as you said it, I immediately went towards all the different empires that fundamentalists have given tons of money to, and that all of them were built on scams. PTL, the Oral Roberts Tower, 700 Club, and Trump was just of a piece with all of that.
Yeah. And even the Southern Baptist shenanigans, or tragedies that are going on, in a certain sense, you had, thousands and thousands of mostly all male, almost all white Southern Baptists who convinced themselves that we're of God and we're standing on the Bible, and anything else that lifts us up so high that anything else, any problem with that is just a minor infraction. That counts for more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Same kind of, it's the same kind of reasoning. We're Republicans, we're conservatives, a little bit of lying and a little bit of election fraud, a small little insurrection, not a big deal. It's just remarkable how similar it is.
Well, it's interesting to talk about. I'm thinking about Tripp's comment a moment ago about white people not being in power. And it's almost as if that statement is part of the problem, because what I think is everything that Brian is saying, I think is absolutely right. Notice, Brian, I'm taking actual notes on what you're saying because I'm working on a book on fundamentalism. And that whole idea of the rejection of the facts and the make-believe universe, and just having to build these structures that prepare people for basically authoritarian control, and there's fraud and all these other things that are caught up with that. But there's also this and we've talked, I know the three of us have talked about this before. There's a very distinctive idea about power. And that idea is power over. And so the only imaginary that these communities have about power is a pyramid of power in which a few people hold it over everyone else. And that those few people are given that right, basically it used to be the king, a divine right, then you widen it to, kind of white male conservative men with all the right theology, the divine right of those people. But the imaginary is that there's always a hierarchical structure of power, and there's always somebody who has to be on top. And that's what they're afraid of. It's like when I think about power, and I think about the growing sorts of voices of Latinos and Latinas, and the growing voices, the growing, anxiety and how necessarily loud I think that Black America is being right now, and LGBT community and all these different communities that are wanting and needing to claim their voice in the public square, to say we want this seat at the table. And they have made so many gains in that in the last, since the 1950s, is that the imaginaries of power in those communities generally are not of pyramids over people. There are different kinds of imaginaries. They're more communal imaginaries. They're La Familia, with the Latin communities, the family, which is a different kind of imaginary, or the neighborhood, as it were. And in African American, it's the beloved community. And with LGBTQ people, it's this share. I think of a lot of it as a shared identity of freedom and joy. And so the way power operates in those communities, and it doesn't mean that no people in those communities ever fall for the pyramid imaginary, but overall, there's this larger history of potentially different ideas about communal power. And so when African Americans start gaining visibility and place in a political system, or in the entertainment world, or what have you, it's not because they're trying to take over the top of the pyramid and force people to the bottom of a pyramid, but they're just simply trying to set a bigger table. They're trying to open up the beloved community. And that's what that these white people in particular cannot understand, because they have no conception of power other than controlling people who are beneath them. That's what power is to them. And so I'm not afraid, because that's not my idea of power. I mean, I am afraid of people having pyramid-shaped power. I think that's what we should be afraid of. But that goes for anybody who holds pyramid-shaped power. But I'm not afraid of being in community with people who are different than me. As a matter of fact, I welcome it, because the more we share the body politic and understand that we can be together, I think the safer we all are, the more joyful we all are, the more all of our stories are valued. There's a part of me that just doesn't get the fear. I know where it comes from, but there's a level in which it hurts.
Yeah.
When I hear them talk about power in the ways they talk about power, and how I know they think about it.
Do you think that there's like that contrast of when you take the image of a pyramid and this kind of top-down power, those images of power are very zero-sum, and so the relations in it are the.
Uh-oh, did we lose Tripp?
He just froze. That's right.
He did. I don't know what's going. Can someone tell us in the chat if you can still hear me and Brian, or if the whole thing going through Tripp is failed? Oh, there he comes. He just.
You're back, okay. Tripp.
You're back.
Oh, so yeah. Our internet on our street, our neighbors still haven't had street internet for an hour. I mean, for 4 days. Mine was out for 3, but so I don't know.
Okay.
What's going on? But
I'm dying to hear what you say about power and pyramids.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just that if you have zero-sum relations and power in your picture of divine power, in your picture of human power, is a nice ordered thing, then it sets you up for competition to get higher in the network of power. So how do you relate to other things? It's always means to an end to gain power. And Trump just says it out loud. He performs it with gusto, right? Yes. And he'll even perform the affect of being in charge, and people will resonate with him and give him more power, even if he doesn't accomplish anything. And I think that there's this, I think it's in, well, Augustine early on gives the thing about you should have, you love God and do what you want, right? And then when he picks up this theme of the relation of love and power in City of God, he talks about the problem at the heart of the Roman Empire. What's going on in their country is that they have sought to have rightly ordered power, but not rightly ordered love. And once you have, if love is serving power, then you're going to have an inherent problem. But when power serves love, then you don't get these zero-sum relations. You try to move to like non-zero sum relations. You recognize that cooperation and community and things are entailed in what love is. So power is utilized for a different mode of engagement. And I think that what the fear generated in Trump, what you see in this question, y'all both asked so well about the fundamentalists winning, are people that can't imagine a world where their neighbor and their enemy are something other than, right, people they are competing against. And even if you think of like Thatcher's, comment about what is the world made up of, like markets and families kind of thing, like underneath that is like these institutions, these structures, the way we actually mediate relationships. Those are fictions that distract you from what's really real. And those really real things compete in zero-sum relations. And that's just, it's deadly. It's deadly. But if you believe that's how the world works,
yes,
then you're going to find a leader and you're going to find a community and you're going to have a story that justifies you winning in it.
Yes.
And I think that's like why I was like, I agreed with you the moment you said it, Brian, but I was like, oh no, he's right. This is really that thread runs right back right into our history as a church and as Americans, our kind of colonial settler history.
Mm.
And it's funny because a lot of the alternative communities in American history were always rebelling against that in some way, shape, or form. And they would always get deemed, heretics or utopian or what have you. And so they would wind up on the far margins of culture when many of them actually had interesting possibilities, I think, that they held, but they were never the winners of the story, as it were. Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, I'm just thinking about this, how your view of God really is at the center of all this. That phrase, the Almighty, that becomes the stand-in name for God, and how this sense of absolute power, absolute control, absolute, people are going to think I'm being uncharitable here, but we're ruining dinner. Absolute ego, that the slightest insult to my ego, divine ego, means you're going to suffer in eternity forever. No extenuating circumstances. No, it's a pretty insecure totalitarian dictatorship. Not only that, but we're going to punish everybody for all eternity just for being born because the first parents did something bad. You put the whole thing together, it really is a setup for, it's like a super, super dangerous idea of God. And I keep coming back to something that one of Elton Trueblood's, the great Quaker pastor and scholar, he told me that he learned from Elton Trueblood. One of his students told me that Elton Trueblood said, the idea of the incarnation is not that we had an idea of God and then Jesus came along and we lifted him up to that idea. It's that we had all these ideas of God. Jesus came along and blew them all out of the water, and we had to reconfigure our ideas of God around Jesus. Now that's how it ought to be. I don't think that's how it actually has worked out, but it's this sense that here is someone who says the lords of the Gentiles lord it, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And as you pointed out in your book on gratitude, Grateful, and they claim to be benefactors. I'm doing you a favor. There's going to be so much winning that you won't be able to take it. I'm doing you a favor by controlling you and dominating you. And then Jesus says, so the lords of the Gentiles have their gain, but I'm among you as one who serves. What does that reveal about how does that challenge those conventional notions of God? It seems to me people either ought to stop talking about Jesus as being the Word of God and the revelation of God, or they ought to adjust their understanding of power.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I was just agreeing, Diane.
I just want to hear more of your yes.
Well, how about I want to ask you a question that's related to this, and let you both answer, because Brian had a new book just come out, Do I Stay Christian? And as part of it, Brian and I already pre-recorded these 3 videos that walk through the book, and anyone can go get them at doistaychristian.com. And in it, we were in September, we're going to do 4 Sunday nights in a row where we answer questions from people that have read the book. People can use the videos in their talking group. So people have been sending questions. And then with the Bible for Normal People team, we set up the Only God Ordained Survey.com, where people get to pick their one big God question. And I've been going through hundreds and hundreds of these things.
Gosh.
And about 10 years ago, Tony Jones and I did a survey on the internet, on BeliefNet, when that was blowing up, about people's big God questions. And about half of them are the same. And then the frequency on them shift. But one of them is completely new in both situations. And it's real specific. Before, when you ask like the Do I Say Christian question, or like the big question about God, that has not been on it before, that is the most popular, that's, other than like the problem of evil, pluralism, like the normal kind of questions people ask, it was, what is the point of staying around, where when people hear the word Christian, they think the justifications for the kind of top-down, competitive, ugly power that is undermining religious institutions, political institutions, has this kind of blind support to a kind of economic expression that is pillaging the planet and the poor. And there's variations of this question, but it's shocking to me. And then when I go check, it's the younger the person is, the more they go, what is the point?
Right.
What is the point? And there's usually an apology after it. It's like, no, Jesus is great. and I believe in God. Some of them like, I believe in God, and Jesus seems like a really good access to that. But it's like the institution itself is corrupted to the point that when you ask the big God question, it's like, well, I can deal with God. Jesus said something, but it's just like, why still Christian? And what do we do? And it's shocking to me, because it wasn't like I had that question after 9/11 and the way we responded, but the sheer volume in both responding to this stuff for the Do I Stay Christian questions and the Only God Ordained survey, both of them you keep seeing the frequency of those questions. So I wonder if y'all have thoughts about it, have, doing lots of speaking in different parts of the country, if that's an actual trend you think is real, and not just people that happen to listen to my podcast and click on things. And what's a helpful way of even addressing or acknowledging the pain that's coming from?
Well, I'll say something. I just, I teach with a living school, and I last week we had a week-long intensive with about 60, 65 students. And I sent a note to some other members of the CAC team, and I said, this intensive showed me that the starting point is accelerating. People are at a different starting point than they were 5 years ago. And what I mean by that is, it's like, it's not just that the old answers aren't working, the old questions aren't even working. We're just in a whole new reality. And I think part of it is the acceleration of religious corruption, the acceleration of political corruption. It's putting us all in this mode of wondering, who can we trust? What can we trust? And I think it's creating this sort of broad-based, like, just give me something simple and clear that I can start with, because this whole pyramid of knowledge or pyramid of power or whatever else just feels hopeless and untrustworthy.
I'm thinking about that, Brian, the way you're describing that in relationship to an interesting little thread I saw on Twitter. Just it was like a day ago or maybe 2 days ago. I can't remember anything because my brain's a little foggy. But it was Melissa Flora Bixler, who I know a lot of people follow. She's a Mennonite pastor in North Carolina, and she writes really good books. She written about the Old Testament and written about, I think, a book called How to Have an Enemy. And so anyway, she is apparently at some big Mennonite meeting right now. And a Palestinian Christian came up to her and said, why are all of these Christians in America hating the word Christian? And then that unfolded this small thread where she said, sometimes I'm beginning to worry that the anxiety and anger that we've directed towards Christianity, the way that we even frame some of the questions, are so embedded in white Western culture that we can't even see the question from another angle. Mm-hmm. And so the angle she was pointing out was that for Palestinian Christians, who are like the minority of an oppressed minority, the word Christian is actually an amazing word. It's a word that holds them to an identity that's deeply embedded in the land, in the Holy Land, and it's an identity that their ancestors have held on to through all kinds of terrible and great moments. And it's also a liberative identity. And so I'm beginning to wonder, when we have these conversations, if it isn't in part important for those of us who are in leadership roles to begin to point that out and help people sort of pull those threads apart, because it is not all of Christianity. We know this. I know you guys know this. It's not all of Christianity that has done this. It is not every church. It is not all institutions, but rather it is a specific group of European white institutions that have done a real number on these issues of power control and this pyramid structure, that have really created this incredibly explosively negative environment about Christianity in the United States. But it isn't like that for everybody. And I think that somehow we're going to keep having to leverage that into these conversations. Yeah. But sometimes even the way we're asking the question is privileging the very thing that we're hoping to help undo. Yeah. And so if we can find and I think your book, Brian, goes a long way to this, try to find some different framing for the problem, some different framing for the question. But I just thought that was a really great thing when I read that from Melissa, and it made me stop and think, and it's like, yeah, I hear that from a lot of people, and I especially hear it mostly from younger white Americans, many of whom have had experience within evangelicalism. They still are thinking primarily within the terms that were established for them by white evangelicalism, and so it's very hard for them to see these other pieces of what it means to have an identity of being Christian. And that word is not negative everywhere around the world. There are places where that is the most positive of identities, and freeing of identities, and deeply rooted identities. And so we've got to figure that out. And I just want to hold that in with this conversation, because I have a tendency to do this too, say the church or Christianity is, I can't be Christian anymore. I can stay Christian if I'm in solidarity with the 2% of people in the Holy Land who are Palestinian Christians, who are, like I said, doubly oppressed. They're suffering from two oppressions, and so bad over there that they're having to leave their historic homelands in order to just survive. And that's a kind of Christianity I can stand there and go, yes, I am with these people. I'm in solidarity with these people. I can call myself Christian with them. Maybe that's part of our job right now, is to figure out where the truest parts of the story reside and where the story has been lying, and help people sort that piece out. What the lie is and where the lie lives, and where what the truth is about Christianity and where those truths live. So anyway, it's just something you can tell I'm really struggling with myself and going toward.
That's such a great answer. And I think you're right. It's hard for especially younger people leaving evangelicalism now, white evangelicalism, because the evangelicalism they're leaving was even more concentrated of the ugly, right? Like as there's been more and more people leaving, then those that remained were down for the ugly even more intensely. And so it so informed them that after 2016 and everything after that, it was like 3/4 of the people, that use the word Christian are now like, QAnon adjacent and all these kinds of things. Like you hear the stories and you're like, oh, and I grew up Baptist preacher's kid in the South. I knew some of that, but that was not I never thought that was normative in ways that a lot of people, when they leave it, go, oh my God, that's what was going on. But your response, Anna, reminded me of that conversation and I had with Adam Clark during our Upsetting the Powers class, which was, reading James Cone with a couple thousand people online and stuff. And one of the things he said in response to that question is he said, I said whoever the name was, and he goes, oh, I'm just going to assume this person's white because the black church is the only space that you're going to go in a week that isn't being run by plantation logic. It's what happens at work and what happens any place white people are in charge. Y'all may not know it, and I remember hearing that, and he goes, and it led to this conversation about like, what would it mean, especially in America, for predominantly white churches for those communities to be ones, right, where you are unlearning and repenting of that kind of desire for power. You're going to the presence of the divine to deal with that fear that generates this anxiety and ugliness in culture. And I think part of it is that Western Christendom and those that have ran it don't know what it would look like to be deeply religious and it not be culture dominant.
Right.
And so what do is you nuance things in your sermon so that everyone that's still comfortable with things as they are kind of go, oh, that was a bit edgy, Brian, or come on, Tripp, I don't know about that. But you aren't like clear, like, and if you run for president and your minister's clear, it gets you in trouble. So I feel like there's this, that's a hopeful or like a hopeful way that resonates with what, Melissa was saying, Diana. And I wonder what kind of things have to happen for there to be communities that are that intentional about expressing it. Because if what goes through most of your neighbors' minds when they see a church is they know there's a flag next to the altar and that's the most important part, then there needs to be some kind of definitional clarity in the community that this isn't what we're ultimately giving our allegiance to. And it seems that kind of silence or sidestepping or mitigating clarity has led to, I don't know, the ability, right, for more and more people that are younger just to go like, okay, God, I guess, Jesus, okay, but Christian, the church, really?
I mean, that's what all of us have been working on for a long time. There's a nice line of stuff going on in the chat, which I really appreciate, about African-American voices and all these other different theological perspectives. And certainly I think that anybody who is part of like the homebrew community or as sort of part of the larger conversations that Brian and I are involved in or writing about knows that we're attuned to all that. And And you can actually, I think that you can see in work that we've each done, adjustments along the way, and how we've actually listened to people who have offered us a completely different visionary framework, and that it's changed us. It's changed us over the course of the last decade. It's changed us over the last 20 years. I know you 20 years ago, Tripp, but I certainly known Brian for that long. And so I think that there's a certain kind of curiosity and tenderness of heart that has to, that communities can create in their adherents, a willingness to listen. Church does not have to just reinforce the ideas we already have. They can help us to develop the dispositions of character to actually be able to enter more deeply into the transformative life of God. And that includes being able to hear voices that are from cultures that are beyond the ones we're familiar with, and being able to understand how the Spirit operates in a variety of voices throughout the whole of the planet. I know Brian has ideas here, but I just want to jump in real quickly with this one thing that's just been bugging me like crazy under the category of denominational shenanigans. I got in a lot of trouble before I got COVID. I'm sort of glad I got COVID because it made me quiet for a few days on Twitter, and the anxiety towards me calmed down. But the Episcopal Church is getting ready to have its big national meeting. And one of the things that's up for discussion is whether or not the table of the Eucharist should be opened to everybody. That includes non-baptized people. And I guess it was 10 days ago, again, COVID fog, 10 days or 2 weeks ago, a group of Episcopal theologians, 22 theologians, put out a letter and said, no. The table is just for the baptized. And it made this strong case that the Eucharist should only be given to God's people, not all people. I mean, it literally said that in this letter. And I lost my freaking mind on Twitter. And I tweeted out this single tweet. I said, all people are God's people. And that created for me 2 days of Twitter hell. And literally my favorite thing was this long, complicated tweet thread from a person who teaches at Princeton, trying to prove by using the theology of Karl Barth that all people aren't God's people, and that there's actually a distinction between God's people and all people. And I just read that and I thought, that's what we're doing here. You know, is that this is what our denominations are trying to sort of work on, you know, right now. And if you start making distinctions like that, that's not being able to create the kind of community that we're talking about. That's literally holding to a set of rules that were written within the distinctive context of a power of church authority of your Western European culture. And they'll say, oh, no, this was the early church. It was not the early church. It was not present until after the 4th century. And that's a different thing. It's the imperial church. And so anyway, it's you know, that's the kind of thing that people just are, I don't know, they're just arguing about and trying to bring toward. How can you have a church on one hand that's making policy moves like that, and yet you're trying on the other hand to become more inclusive? I mean, the literal, and not just inclusive for the sake of being inclusive, but actually trying to, in a sense, I think, question the political power imaginary. But see, they're not able to see the political power imaginary within their own community. They're blind to it. Instead, it's just our polity. It's the way it's always been. Jesus himself designed it this way. John the Baptist did this, or whatever it is. And so that's, yeah, I'm really glad to see that there are a bunch of Episcopal priests in here who are saying, oh, yeah, they were horrified by it too. So what I think is happening in terms of the congregation, in terms of the denominations, is that there are real sort of congregations that are doing this kind of work, and there are such good local leaders. We all know them, and obviously we're all products of these kinds of congregations. But the denominational structures themselves are still incredibly rigidly stuck in this other thing. And they are not escaping it. As a matter of fact, it's getting worse. They're re-articulating them, they're reifying them, and they are making, I think, their own situation harder. So that's my... Did I ruin dinner enough for everybody?
Oh.
With that.
Well,
I probably ruined my life on Twitter again.
Yeah, I don't. When you sent me those tweets, and then I went and read it, and honestly, I'm friends with, well, I think at least 4 of the theologians. So I didn't message them, but I'm so Baptist. This is one of those moments where I'm just like, this is what happens when you believe that your priests do magic.
Yeah.
Like, you got to keep the magic alive. So you got to come up with rules for all the magic and stuff. And I know they're not going to like it when I say this, but also I was amused by picking John the Baptist. Like, what about John the Baptist is infant baptism, and it emerging with citizenship to a state. And like, I mean, John the Baptist wouldn't baptize you unless you fasted so much your skin was sagging because you knew you sucked, and then you get baptized. Like, it's sometimes I'm like, and I know they, I'm like, and I know you know this because like, you're like one of my smarter, like you're smarter than me. But I do think that there's this, this is true about almost every denomination. There's like 10% of the people in charge of those denominations, the 10% that are in charge, love that denomination. They really think it's the best of all time. And they think everyone should be one. And they got to make sure they keep the pure expression of it. And so they follow the internal logic that probably only 10% of that group at best ever understood or did. Right. And then they make these pronouncements. They're like, well, here's how it works. Got to have a closed table unless you've been baptized, but we're edgy. We take any version, and I get, I understand that because I'm like that about certain philosophical commitments. So I understand having like deep thoughts about it, but my experience is in a congregation is that most of the people that are there, I have very little understanding these days as to even what that denomination's about. They pick the churches. They aren't going there because this is like the brand they're a part of. They've been in 9 different denominations if they've moved 9 times, and so there's this, the effect in a world where the denominational identity was determinative of the same kind of internal consistency and clarity is off-putting in a world where that kind of understanding isn't available. But could you imagine? This is one of those things when you sent it to me, I'm like, I just couldn't imagine sitting there as someone that served the Eucharist before and then think I went to bed like smiling because somebody that wanted it, I was like, nah. Jesus is like, Judas, Peter, here you go. And then I'm like, but theologically.
You see how this all fits together. It's the us versus them, and this is the insurrection. This is guns. This is power. This is denominational shenanigans. It's kind of, this is all the same cloth in my book.
Yep.
Different degrees of it.
But,
Brian's laughing at us.
But Brian spoke at Lambeth Conference, so he knows how this really works.
I was going back to read chapter 4 of my book, Do I Stay Christian, which is called For Reasons Not to Stay Christian Because of Christianity's Loyal Company Men.
Oh.
And there are these people, mostly men, but some women, and they're just trying to be loyal soldiers. And it's a real danger for, as you say, for our denominations, because our denominations have, mainline Protestant denominations have found a way to change, but they haven't been able to change their documentation. Like, they've changed their behavior, but not their documentation. And so then all it takes is somebody to go back into the documentation, and then in a sense they have the law on their side, and then they can stage a purge. So I don't know the way out of this, but and it's not just the documentation, like, creeds and councils and I'm so embarrassed, I'm forgetting, in the Episcopal Church, what's their big doctrinal? There's the Westminster Confession, but there's another one.
Well, it's the canons of the church, and then there are the rubrics, which are the directions within the prayer book, and those are the things that guide the polity of the church.
So the canons and rubrics, it's not just that. I mean, if we really want to be honest, it's also the hymns and the prayers that reify a masculine God, that reify an almighty God, that reify that the purpose of the gospel is to keep us out of hell. And even in, some of the rites in the Episcopal liturgy for the Eucharist, it brings, it's a enactment of penal substitutionary atonement. And so I don't know what we're going to do about those things. But it does leave every congregation with those rubrics vulnerable to company men who can lift up the book. And of course, the Methodists are dealing, this has been part of what's happened with Methodism. And there's been some discussion in the chat of the Catholic Church. And of course, I just feel so sorry for the Catholic Church. It's like they painted themselves into a corner, because they can't admit they were wrong without, in a sense, undermining some of their very foundational reasons for being. It's not easy. What a mess.
Company men also have non-disclosure agreements and take lots of advice from lawyers.
Yes.
Yeah.
But like, just thinking of, like, going through my head when I looked at the list of when Diana and I were making a list of all the denominations having issues, like when you think of just like the Baptist one, so much of that was, we had to do our legal protection, and then we got non-disclosure agreements and all this kind of stuff, and it just sets up when the company is more important than the community, then all sorts of ugliness happens. And it just leads to this. It just feels weighty, and I think anyone that's been in leadership in different institutions knows the feeling, because you never really know in the middle of it. Like, it's hard to get a clear view, because like, you're trying to do a good job at whatever responsibility and leadership you have, and you're trying to be faithful, and you are in the know on things that other people aren't, and you're trying to be a steward of it. But you also have all these pressures from everyone that's there that doesn't even know everything that's going on, and you feel overwhelmed, and you're trying to, then, like, you need some advice, you need some help figuring things out. So what do you turn to? Your canon law or your lawyer or whatever. But underneath it, it's you as a leader stuck in a situation, making a decision, trying to have some kind of integrity. And yet there's also the fear of assessment and judgment by the community if you're honest and straightforward in all these kinds of ways. And I just know tons of leaders that when they're out of the moment, look back and go, that was dumb. But if they look at their journals and or you were with them when they happened, they're like, I was just trying to do my best. It's like part of this tension, I think, is that we have all this inheritance, be it imagery and prayers that we don't know what to do with anymore, because the theologians may have 600 pages explaining how it's not really that penal, but it definitely sings like it, and stuff like that. I don't know what I don't know what to do with it, but like, having spent the last few years at churches that pull out all the old stuff a lot more in very old buildings, and you aren't used to it, I'm like, ooh, that's intense. Like, on the bus ride home, you're like, just to be clear, washed in the blood is not necessary. Really bad depiction. Anyway.
See, I'm not kidding that I think it's part of the same fabric. And Brian, I'd really be interested in your comments here, because what we're talking about with the authoritarianism, with the insurrection, that's a big group of people who are afraid of loss of power. And so what do they appeal to? They appeal to the past. That's part of the appeal, this nostalgia, what the rules have been. White people should be in charge. This is the way it's always been. Our culture is XYZ. These are the things we have always done. And if you're not an American, you won't, you know, if you're not that, you're not an American. And then they leave the door open for all kinds of violence against anybody who doesn't participate in that nostalgia or those rules and that history and all that sort of stuff. But that's exactly what's happening in the denominations too. And I'm looking at the comments about the Catholics, the Methodists, the Unitarians. I mean, everybody's chiming in here with anxiety. In our denominations, because of the fear of decline, that's really across the board right now among white denominations, primarily white denominations in the United States. There is this same thing that's developing. Well, this is our culture. These are our rules. This is the memory that we have. These are the nostalgias. And if you don't adhere to that stuff, you're not appropriately Episcopal, or you're not appropriately Lutheran, or you're not appropriately this. And we've got to do something about you. We've got to control you in some way. And I mean, just as I finish that up, there's this really interesting example that's going on right now. Not only that thing that I was just saying with this stuff with the Episcopal Church, with all of the flood of material that's coming out, there's this one young theologian, a guy who was recently ordained in the Episcopal Church, who has been, I will say it just out loud, I think a deeply problematic person on social media, and he has a big social media following. And part of the point that he and his friends are making is that it's that very appeal to nostalgia, ritual, and rules that is bringing young adults into the church right now. And so they're saying, oh, well, you know, really what young adults want is we want clarity, we want certainty, we want authority, we want doctrinal purity, we want all of these things. And the problem with the Episcopal Church is that it's been too ambiguous. It's not been clear enough. It's not followed the rules. It's amorphous. You can't put your hands around it. And this is what young adults want. And the church is in such anxiety about its own decline that this one very loud group of young thinkers, in part led by this guy, but there is a band of them, they are beginning, the bishops are saying, oh, look at what the young people are saying. The young people want stuff like this. They want us to be clear about all these rules. They want order. They want the hierarchy. They believe that they're ontologically changed when they're made priests. And that fellow, the most problematic one, he has a Substack, and I read it this week. And what he was saying in there is he said, I don't actually want punitive action against people who have questions about the resurrection, but I do think we need to make polity reinforcements of our doctrinal standards for the sake of the church. And I'm reading this and I'm going to myself, oh my gosh, I'm not going to shoot anybody for what they believe about the resurrection, but we really do need to think about perhaps bringing them up for heresy trials and use whatever polity specifics we have to be able to control this mess. And that is what's happening in some level in a lot of these different denominations right now, is that these kinds of more authoritarian voices are gaining traction because of the fear of the denomination's decline. And it's not really about liberal conservative. It's about the shape of power, who holds power, and how power is organized.
So just in the interest of ruining dinner, let me throw out an unpleasant observation. So 500 years or 700 years or 300 years, depending on the denomination, I guess none were 700, but some hundreds of years ago, a bunch of people started these denominations and made the rules. And if people today tried to use their polity to change the rules, I don't think they could. So, in other words, I think the conservative voices would make it impossible to change the rules, much like what's happening in our government.
Right.
And what that means then is that progressives have, in a sense, gotten a free ride on inherently conservative organizations. And it may be that progressives are going to be kicked out. You know, what happened, in other words, the Southern Baptists might not have been the anomaly. The Southern Baptists might have just been the first. And we see, you know, the Methodists are going through this. And what that suggests to me then is that progressives had better decide, are they willing to be kicked out and then have to start new things the way the founders of these denominations did 500 years ago? And if they were to start new things, what would they be like? And what needs to be said now? So, for example, Diana, when I just dipped into the tweet storm you were involved in, and I didn't even read it, because part of me is saying that this isn't a criticism of you. I'm glad you spoke up, but part of me is saying anybody who wants to argue about who can come to the communion table and is doing nothing about climate change and is doing nothing about the deterioration of democracy and is doing nothing about the growing gap between rich and poor. I just feel like if they want to save their institution and they don't care about these other things, I just don't get it. What I want to do, I want to bring, if I were a member in good standing of a denomination, I'd want to bring a motion to say every single one of our hymns should be purged of harmful images of God. And we need 100 new hymns written that teach us to see the sacredness of the earth and care for the earth. And we need to get rid, that's doing the work that we need to do, because I just think people have you can find the 1% of young people who get attracted to dressing up in religious garb and all the rest. And if you want to grow your denomination by finding those 1%, God bless you, you go for it, but the rest of us are worried about saving the earth. And we just don't have time for that kind of shenanigans. But here becomes the interesting thing. If we can get all people at the table, what do we want the table to mean? Do we want it to mean coming to the table of creation and understanding that Jesus was saying, I'm giving myself for the benefit of others. This life isn't about taking, it's about giving. And oh my gosh, what a beautiful meaning. But the truth is, we'll become more strict about what we want people, about how we want people to be baptized before they come to table, and will remain incredibly vague about a constructive meaning for what the table is about. That's just in the interest of ruining dinner. That's all.
Well, I'm really impressed the way you're stepping up here, Brian. You took the ruining dinner as a challenge.
I'm trying.
But would we be willing to give, wink, wink, special ontological status to whichever denomination reworks all their hymns and comes up with 101 celebrating the goodness, inherent value of all our non-human neighbors? I feel like the three of us would lay hands on their new hymnal. It will transform it. I had a priest at my ordination, so I technically go back to Peter,
Oh my.
So,
Don't tell him.
Well,
somebody will get upset with you. I'm
not going to tell you which one. I don't know. And he was Benedictine. He wasn't even Jesuit. I mean, the Jesuits, they'll lay hands on all sorts of things, but the Benedictine, anyway, okay. I don't want to not touch on the gun thing. And I want to phrase it in a question for both of you, because when we were thinking of topics and this one came up, I got really irritated, and I was like, well, I'm just going to ask Brian and Diana, and it came up in a group chat where I'm the elder in this group chat. The others are all like 25 to 30-year-olds in different helping professions. Most of them probably some type of ministry adjacent thing, all went to divinity school type of that group of people. And the gun violence thing came up, and in the same chat, there were, depending on where they are in the country, examples of poor, violent policing and these kind of things. And and so often, this group's probably radical enough. I'm the moderate, which is not a normal experience for me. And all of a sudden I realized I'm the old guy defending institutions and needing healthy ones as like something for human beings, just to like figure out how to cooperate. And then I'm like, am I just explaining them like cognitive psychology and why these are really important? And I had all these kind of responses. And I realized that if you're asking the question, if you're looking at gun violence, like when are the events of gun violence we look at? When, like essentially like white kids get murdered at school. Like if you just look at the total number of deaths, there's plenty of them. A lot of them suicide, that are predominantly white men commit suicide with guns. So it's not even like it's specifically these acts of horror in particular places. Then you get these events of where our police state has these ugly moments that catch social media intensity. You look as someone who thinks that at least me and probably everyone in the group I was having a conversation, like we're like, yeah, like the way the whole Russia-Ukraine thing's bad, but like we just spent tons of money out of nowhere. That like think of all the things that were in the platform of the Democratic Party that basically went shenanigans to make sure Bernie Sanders didn't win, because they love progressives voting for them, but they really don't want someone that critiques capitalism winning. So you get the whole South Carolina thing, Obama calling everyone to back out and all that kind of stuff. And if you're involved in the campaign, there's even more baggage to it, right? Like, so you're sitting there with a group of people who are like we spend all this money in a Ukraine war. We don't do all these things that were part of the platform that younger people invested in the campaigns, invested in the platform, don't do. Plenty of things Biden can do just by signing it, and he just doesn't do it. Anyway, if you are a progressive like me, drives you up a wall. It's like one party doesn't believe in democracy and the other one does if capitalism tells them it can. So that's like my general MO. And I'm the conservative-ish person in this group chat. But they're all devoutly Christian. So this is where this question comes from. And so then it gets on the question of guns. And the guns is intimately connected to the question of police. And that's intimately connected to our problem around prisons. Like underneath it, it seems that we have a giant problem of a militarized nation. The amount of money we spend on the military, that we give to other people for their military, that we spend on the police, that we spend on prisons, that we spend on guns is huge. And it's all connected. It seems to this desire that power is the only means of justifying your self-existence. And that the ability to give is founding narrative.
Oh, there he goes again. Tripp. Oh, I hope he comes back.
Tripp, it's a very nice frozen smile on your face right now. There we go.
I froze.
Are you back?
Well,
there you are.
I mean, I'm moving for me. But can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
All right, so the short version is the gun violence thing comes up. And if you are friends with police, you know that they have all the feelings. Like, what am I going into? Who knows what they have? Right. So they have to be carrying stuff, which they also carry all the times they go in to meet with a 12-year-old black kid who's playing, like Nerf guns with his friends and then gets shot. Right. Like, so unless we decide that as a nation, we're going to demilitarize our military, our prisons, the police, and all these kinds of things, then every little institution is self-justifying itself. And underneath it, I think, is this big fear and insecurity that Brian talked about at the beginning of this moment, the fear that's at the heart of so many institutions. And that if you don't think you and your neighbor can actually relate, reason, work things out, compromise, and come to some conclusion where violence doesn't settle it, then everyone needs the resort to violence on the back end. And it's just, if you can't handle the gun question without handling the police question, you can't handle the police question without handling the gun question, and you can't do that while we're still making money off private prisons, and you can't do that when all the money for guns is going into to buy off politicians. Anyway, I've never felt more depressed in a group chat with 12 people younger than me that are ministers than realizing that all of us were deeply invested in winning elections. And knowing that the few people that you are invested in aren't going to do anything.
Hey, Brian, while Tripp's
amazing. Oh,
I was going to say, while Tripp's was a little bit frozen there, might be a good idea if you go ahead and comment on some of that, because I know you've got stuff and you've got to be off in 3 minutes. And so we're waiting for Tripp to come back on.
So Tripp, I really appreciate you bringing that up. And here's the problem I think we have, and this, in a sense, points back both to the problems in Christianity and the importance of Christianity, and another reason why we don't solve our problems by just throwing it out and giving up on it. I don't think we can get to a better place until we actually give people a different vision or imaginary or, understanding of a nonviolent way to order society. And of course, that would have far-reaching impacts, but it's basically a different story. A friend of mine wrote a book years ago called The Knight and the Gardener. And he said there are really two stories in the human race. One is the story of the knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, who goes off to fight. And the other is the gardener who goes off to bring life from the earth. And who is going to teach a gardener narrative for us to live by? Because there are other ways for us to have a peaceful life, but it involves people actually believing that such a thing is possible and desirable and feasible and doable, all of which I think could be taught. And you would say, who could start teaching that? And no politician can win an election until enough people are ready to vote for that kind of vision. So to me, this is where I'm a big believer in electoral politics, and I'm involved with Vote Common Good and other things to influence electoral politics. But I'm also a big believer in changing the conditions. And that changing of the conditions has to do with prophetic and pastoral work, I think. So that's my 2 cents before I have to go.
I was just thinking about, Brian, I wanted to affirm what you were saying about, starting kind of a new church, sort of thing, and part of the reason why I enter into discussions like the one I did with communion is because I'm trying to give cover to the good people who are still within the institution, who are feeling threatened by the power structure itself. And I think that when I say that, it connects with what you're talking about politically, is that there's a certain amount of work I think that leaders need to do to give cover to the good people who are working within the institutions and trying to take them to their best possible selves. And at the same time, there also needs to be those who are imagining the alternative structure. And so when I think about politics, that's exactly what I think about too, is that there's one level in which I'm working with the Democratic Party to essentially give cover to the good people who are using that structure. And then I also hang out with a lot of real progressive radical types. And in that sense, I'm hanging out with the people who are imagining a new church, as it were.
I do have to leave, but can I just offer one little statement about that? Politics is the art of the possible, and prophetic work is changing what's possible. And this is where I think they go together. Hey guys, I'm sorry I got to drop out, but so good to be with you. Keep up the good work.
It was good to see you.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Brian.
All right.
Well, we can, I guess, finish up with.
Well, hopefully my internet doesn't die again. I've had a very edifying relationship with Virgin Media this past week. Like, how does your internet go out for multiple days and you don't tell anyone in advance? And anyway, I mean, the only thing I thought that I wanted to ask is, so what's up next at the cottage? Like you've been doing, you did the Shall the Fundamentalist Win series, and you're like coming out of your COVID fog. Like what's the thing energizing you? You hinted at a book on fundamentalism you're working on. What's going on?
Yeah, the project that I'm still working on is this thing about fundamentalism, and that's going to be somehow my next book. And so I'm putting together the book proposal for that, and that's due within the next 2 weeks, which the COVID thing was really a terrible setback for, because I've got a pretty limited calendar to be able to put it together. And I think that folks at the cottage can you'll continue to see these themes unpack in the midweek episode issues of the cottage, and you can see how broadly applicable they all are. They work towards politics, they're working towards the insurrection. I think this whole thing with guns is really interesting. Brian made several comments, really, I'm serious, I wrote down notes about fundamentalism and this, how it moved from then to now. And so I think that all of that stuff is going to show up in the book in some way, shape, or form. It's not going to be a standard history. I'm calling it a diagnostic history. So it's an essay. It's basically like putting fundamentalism on the couch. I'm going to psychoanalyze it, which is my editor is laughing at me. He thinks it's hilarious, and that it's going to be a really good and surprisingly creative book that will certainly start a lot of conversations. So that's where that's going. And then, I keep up the Sunday stuff with the reinterpreting kind of the lectionary passages in some fresh ways with my friends, and I love doing that. But during July, I have this little project where I'm going to send out brief daily devotions to the paid crowd, which is the crowd that's here, and I think I'm going to do it on Ecclesiastes. I wanted to just kind of do a little sort of summer wisdom sampler. And I started reading Ecclesiastes a couple weeks ago, and I thought, I think I'd really like to just do this with a cottage, sending out a weekly passage, and then using the 4 days that follow to, have some discussion with friends and look at what wisdom means today. And it's interesting because Ecclesiastes was written in a situation of, in a sense, not terribly unlike the political and economic situation that we have today, in terms of it being written, more than 3,000 years ago or whatever it was. But it was a time of extreme wealth and inequality and some other things. And the voice of Ecclesiastes comes out of that. And so I thought that would be kind of a fun project to do for July. So that's what I'm doing at the cottage. And Wild Goose. And going to a wedding in Asheville. I'm going to be in North Carolina a couple times. And Libby Schrader, for my friends who know Libby Schrader, the Mary Magdalene lady. She's getting married this summer in Asheville, and I'm going to go to that wedding, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, that's cool. Well, Wednesday, we leave for our trip to Europe. So we're going to Amsterdam, and then Munich, and then Florence, and then Rome, and then we end up back in North Carolina. But I'm really excited about our friend Jason Michele and I are going to do a Lord of the Rings group.
Oh my gosh.
That's right. I've joked about it on Twitter long enough, and then he's like, no, he runs Crackers and Grape Juice, by the way. If you're Methodist, you probably know, but it's Crackers and Grape Juice podcast. And Richard, Diana's husband, works at the same church as Jason. So, so we've been going through names. We're going to call it Tolkien Heads. Talking heads. And we made.
I got it immediately.
Yeah. And there's basically a justification. I've talked 4 of my favorite Tolkien scholars into joining, the kind of an intro to Tolkien's legendarium and his life and writing and all that kind of stuff right before the new Tolkien show starts in September. So we're going to do a class that then sets up for the Tolkien show. So we get to tell our partners we're working when we do podcasts, responding to each new episode. So I have no idea if I think everyone should like it, but that's because I love Tolkien quite a bit. But he and I were talking. He's down tasked with talking to you and Richard to pick a date in August where I can come up and we can do this in person with everyone. Well, you and I will be in person. Obviously, we're not going to invite everyone over to your house.
I'm thinking all of a sudden Dinah's backyard is going to be a picnic.
The cottage is very hot. It gets really hot when there's hundreds of people in it. But we're going to do so we can record in person. We'll do our Lord of the Rings thing together. But he's going to try to talk to you about dates so we can do a live podcast together like we did that one time where Crackers and Grape Juice and Homebrew and you all hung out. Yeah. And I was like, look, if I'm going to drive up there with these $5 gas bills that America has currently, then I need to do multiple things. And if it gives me a reason for us all to be in the same spot, then it sounds great. So, hopefully that works out. That's my the exciting part of my summer after obviously 20 days in Europe, which is going to just be thrilling.
I just want to encourage everybody to these are really hard days. We're going to hear a lot of bad stuff probably in the next week too, because the Supreme Court cases are going to start coming in. And there's going to be one about guns, and it's likely going to go against the gun control laws that were in a city of New York. And then there's the abortion case that's coming up, and there's a couple other pretty controversial ones too. So people will the more insurrection hearings as well, and these big denominational meetings. It's just like it's a summer designed for everybody to feel horrible if you read the news. But remember, one of the things I hold on to is that this is of a piece, that it's not just this issue. It's not all these siloed, confusing things. This is one fabric of arguments about power, race, control, and the future. And in that, all the people who are gathered here, I know that you have longings, that you're doing great work already, so many of you around these things. Keep it what you're good at, stay informed, be realistic, try to hold as much of the whole picture as you can without sinking into despair, and try to have some fun and see people you love as much as you can. Stay safe while you're doing it, obviously, because COVID's still around. We're gonna keep hanging with you. And all three of the people who are here today, we so appreciate you all. Our job is to keep the team, to take it for the team when necessary, and to make sure you all have the resources and stuff to do the work that you're doing on the ground. I know a lot of you are going Poor People's March, the gun marches, all this sort of stuff. Keep it up. And even though it's tiring and you feel like you might not be getting anywhere, we are really together. And think all the time, the stronger the opposition is to these good changes for the future, that's how we can be certain that the good changes, that we're moving towards something that's new and different, because the opposition is so powerful right now. That's a counterintuitive argument, but it's one that keeps me sane. And I just want to turn it over to you and say, we'll be back. We'll ruin your dinner another time if Mitch McConnell isn't ruin your dinner enough, or Brett Kavanaugh or whoever else.
Yeah, but you got to admit, Brian did a good job. Like I had no idea that he was going to be so good at ruining dinner.
Yeah, Brian often gets the points for being the winsome one, and I get the points for being Eeyore. But if you know us, it kind of works in the opposite direction.
Well, this is going to ruin his reputation. You're like, whoa, just don't ever ask Brian to ruin dinner. Awesome. Well, Diana, I will see you on the other side when I'm on the other side of the ocean.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to see you. And there's so many great people in the chat who are friends. And I love seeing you whenever you show up. And there are people I've seen recently. And I just want to send you all big hugs and love. And you are not alone wherever you are. We're happy to ruin everybody's dinner. And look at that. Tripp froze at the very end. So I guess I get to say good night to you all. And from my house at the cottage, and for the last time from Tripp's basement, thanks for being with us, and we'll be back.